Hey queer friends, are you ready to be inspired? Welcome to Season 5 of Coming Out and Beyond, a podcast that shares stories from the LGBTQIA+ community. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Zanzal.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA+ stories. I am so excited to welcome Miriam Grace today to the show. Mariam is based in the UK and has been working as a psychotherapist for 34 years. She researches and writes about what therapists need to understand about women in midlife, women coming out later in life, and the problems of applying straight psychology to lesbian relationships. Her clients these days all identify as women, and 50% are lesbian or bisexual. Miriam, welcome to the show.
Hi, we were just having a chat, weren't we, beforehand, and we couldn't stop ourselves talking to do the podcast because we have so many topics we'd like to talk about. Absolutely. So we're going to have to narrow ourselves down today a bit.
Well, we are, and this is, if you have followed me or Miriam for a long time, this is the same Miriam Grace that I think about 3 or 4 years ago, we first wrote a blog piece about coming out later and, about catalyst relationships. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know, a catalyst relationship is a relationship with usually a person that makes you realize that you're not as straight as you think you were. And a catalyst also can be an event, but in Miriam's case, she always talks about a catalyst as a human, as a woman usually, who makes you realize that you may not be as straight as you think you are. And she also has been on the podcast before. So we're going to link everything to this. So if you want to follow more of what Miriam has said, you can go to those 2 resources and look her up. So Miriam, for people who are new and don't know you at all, can you tell me your story?
It's all, my professional story and my personal story are really interlinked. So it'll be a bit of both. But about 12 years ago, I started researching and writing about women in midlife. At that point, that was my PhD research, and I wanted to look at women going through the change and why we weren't told anything about this in psychotherapy training. You'd think, wouldn't you, in the whole of a 4-year intensive training, that you would at least touch on some of the impact on women, but that wasn't touched on. And of course, neither were non-straight relationships. The
list goes on and on, right?
Yeah. So I'll jump past that. And so I was interested not so much around the hormonal side, because that, there are experts working around that, but the psychological changes. And then I was experiencing this sort of expanded vision myself, and it's not that I wasn't aware of things. They were sort of peripheral, but I got very busy in my life as a wife, mother, psychotherapist, writer, all of these things. And then for me, it was a bit of an epiphany. It felt as if the scales fell from my eyes, and my personal experience was of an anger rising up in me, and it's not an emotion that's very predominant in me. I don't often feel angry, but I felt I'd been conned, that I've been sold something, sold a deal, or sold a story that wasn't paying off. And I think, when I'm thinking about women in midlife, the prince finds the princess, and then they go and live in the palace, and maybe they have children, and then they live happily ever after, and that's the end. And there's nothing about when, you know, when they're approaching 50, in their mid-40s, and the fairy story is something like, you know, the prince finds the princess and then they go and live happily ever after in the palace. And there's nothing about putting on weight, reaching middle age, you know, falling out with your teenagers, and there's nothing. We're invisible. We don't exist beyond the getting married in the fairy tale. So I felt like the blinkers fell off all of a sudden, and things that I'd not looked at, such as my sexuality, I started to see and explore, and it was wonderful. It was amazing. And the thing about psychotherapy is that psychotherapy is an opportunity for a client to, if they've missed important developmental phases for whatever reason, you know, parents died, or, you know, a very repressive culture, psychotherapy means they can revisit that developmental phase and work it through in a healthy therapeutic relationship, and, you know, and perhaps patch up a bit some of the
Mhm.
missing bits.
Mhm.
And so what an opportunity therapy is to explore your sexuality if you didn't get to do that, say, you know, 15 to 25, if, you know.
But the problem with that is that so many therapists, because as you just said, they
Mm,
sort of skip over like
right.
lesbian, queer relationships coming out later in life, all that stuff in your education. So many therapists, even the ones that consider themselves LGBTQIA
Mm,
friendly, queer therapists, sort of don't get this
don't
whole
get it.
Yes. And what I have found really interesting is that multiples of my clients have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, yeah. I was really excited about coming back to that in a minute, and that's my point exactly. Is that the therapist is biased, the
Mhm.
client is biased, society's biased. So the client comes in to the therapy room, and what do we see? We see a middle-aged woman. So sex isn't going to be on the agenda. And sexuality is not going to be on the agenda. That's the assumption.
If
It's
that's
the
decided,
assumption, you
right.
know.
Assumption is that that's decided.
Yeah. So that's, you know, straight away, oh, you know, she's 50,
Mhm,
you know,
mhm.
um,
Life is
it,
almost over, right? It's
yeah.
funny. Ageism is really actually real, and so many women come alive
Mm,
post children.
yeah.
And
And
everybody gets
yeah,
divorced, but like so many women become the best versions of themselves in their 50s and 60s and 70s. They really do.
absolutely. And that was why I started the original study about women in midlife, because I wanted to say, this is an amazing opportunity. And and then, of course, you know, my own coming out happened within this study, and I won't go into it, but as you and I know, I also had a serious illness in the middle of all this. So there was another sort of form of coming out, which is my body doesn't do what it used to do as
Mhm,
well.
mhm.
So I wouldn't say that I wasn't authentic pre coming out, um, but I was authentic in such a narrow way. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking in a straight way, you know, really straight way.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yes. So you and I then we met, didn't we, in a group similar to Vida Nova, pre
Mhm,
Vida Nova,
mhm,
and I just became really curious about what's the link? Why are so many of us middle-aged?
mhm,
And you know, and why are we going to these groups and not to therapy? And what's therapy like? So I did quite a lot of research, and this resulted in the writing that was published last year by a UK-based academic, they're well-known, Routledge. And I've got a chapter in a book called Queering Gestalt Therapy. And the title, we we discussed this way back when, was selfish and destructive, in inverted commas. Where does the later in life lesbian turn for support? And it was
Wow.
really, yeah, it was really a critique of therapy and, you know, what's missing, what's not there, what do therapists need to know? And there were quotes from various women who answered, you know, my questions and let me interview them and so on, about therapists just missing them, you're just missing the point.
Mhm.
And I've
They
there.
just don't, yeah, like they just, I mean, like I've had like really bad experiences with
Mm,
therapists
yeah,
myself. And,
yeah.
but I also take responsibility in that because I kept going to like three different ones,
Mm,
um, wanting someone to name my sexuality. And
mm,
the
yeah,
only person that can name that is me.
mm,
And so,
exactly.
you know, and I don't, you know, I don't want to really go into like all the this
Mhm.
dismal advice I've gotten. But the thing is that I find that therapists really don't understand this,
Yeah,
and except a handful, you know,
yeah,
somebody like yourself, you
yeah,
know, as a therapist would understand it because
mm,
you have gone through this
yeah,
experience.
yeah.
And but I wonder if this is all tied to like your latest paper, which is called, I love the title, 100 Shades of Misogyny.
Yeah. 50
50
shades.
shades, 50 shades of misogyny. So let's hear about this, Miriam. So, are you in the process of coming out later in life? Are you feeling isolated or lost, cut off from friends and family, or just trying to figure out what is the next step for you? Well, I have a wonderful coaching program called Lotus Group Coaching. It is for people who are female identifying, cis or trans, or non binary folks comfortable in those spaces. And we provide emotional, spiritual, and intellectual support for people who are in the process of coming out later in life. We discuss many things in our community, but what's most important is that you have a community of others who understand. Each one of the coaches in the program have come out later in life, and everybody who is a member of our program is somewhere in the process. So if you are seeking community and you want a soft place to land, go to my website, amoryzanzal.com, and book a connection call. We would love to talk to you.
Absolutely. Well, I was invited to give a paper at the European Gestalt Conference from the book publication happening, and the subtitle, it's a bit psychotherapy. The subtitle is Exposing the Cultural Top Dog and Introjected Relationship Norms, which basically means I'm going to expose the dominant beliefs and how we unconsciously absorb relationship norms. And so I was trying to summarize this before speaking to you. And so to summarize it, I would say,
Can
we
I ask
feel,
you just a quick
yeah,
question before you
yes,
go?
of course, yes.
For those who don't know, what is Gestalt therapy?
It's a humanistic based therapy, and it largely rejects labeling
Okay.
and so on. It's very hard to summarize Gestalt therapy. But Google it.
Google
I
it.
would
Okay.
say.
All right.
Um,
So let's talk a little bit about your paper.
yeah.
And because like what you said about how you started to get angry in your 40s,
Mm,
like you
mm,
sold this bill of goods, and
mm,
I that resonates so much with me.
mm, mm,
And I say to a lot of people, you know, I used to be like an armchair feminist in the
mm,
reality of my hetero marriage to a
Mhm.
relatively wealthy man in a very white community. Um,
Yeah.
I checked all the boxes. I not only checked them, I got A pluses. And all of a sudden, everything changed when I left that
Mm.
that situation.
Yes.
And what ended up happening is that the reality, all of a sudden, I saw the patriarchy, I saw the misogyny that
Mm.
I had just because I had the benefit of incredible privilege, it felt less than somebody who didn't have the benefit of privilege.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and then all of a sudden, I moved to the south of the United States. I'm in a queer relationship. I am facing, all of a sudden, like everything changed. And I started to realize that feminism is very important. And in a way, like in my life, in a way that I never realized before. And so I
Yeah.
see a lot of the patriarchy and the misogyny now. And it's
Yeah.
very hard to get people to like to
Yeah.
understand why it's so important.
Yes, and if you think of my, I'm quite unusual in that I did train very young as a psychotherapist, and it's, have been a psychotherapist a long time. So everything I absorbed throughout my training also came into question because this, the popular psychology that we have today that, most people on the street can use these words and terms and we know what they mean. Was written by rich white men who felt okay to have, a few little affairs with their clients, who were also wealthy white women. And most of the work, the initial work, is around women's hysteria. The patients were hysterical women.
Mhm.
As I came across more of the terms around lesbians, and things that were associated with lesbians, which I'll come on into, a minute, that I realized, this is so lesbophobic. It's like it's sexism times two, because you've got two women. So now we've got two hysterical people in a relationship,
Yeah.
So I will just say that my summary of my paper. So number one, we feel safe with rules, beliefs, labels, and guidelines, and relationships make us vulnerable, because we've got our precious heart.
Mhm.
Um, and so we look externally for certainty, for definitions, and how are we going to tell if this relationship's going to work out and if it's a healthy relationship and so on. Number two, humanistic therapy is about the unique lived experience, or the long word for that is phenomenology. Very good if you play Scrabble. Humanistic therapy is about the lived experience, the unique, that person's experience, not about a general label. Three, psychology is sexist, it's written for men, and it's homophobic. So, it's like, so who would it suit if women were less, in inverted commas, hysterical, less emotional, have sex with men? Oh, well,
Mhm.
that was men, huh? So lesbian tropes are lesbophobic, and I'll want to go into that in a minute with you.
Go into that. Yeah.
Conditioning and bias is in everyone, the therapist, the client, everyone around us, and it doesn't, we have to accept this, that we can't have a therapy room where all the conditioning doesn't come in. So in the therapy room, we have racism, we have sexism, we have homophobia, and we can't push it out because that we're raised in it, we're steeped in it.
Yeah.
What we can do is be aware of it, name it, spot it,
Mhm.
and challenge it. So conditioning and biases in all of us, and diversity and inclusivity require us, this is my final point, to change and to alter our approach. And what I want to do is extremely grandiose, given my energy, my age, my limitations. But what I want to do is to throw that paradigm out and to use women's words, lesbians' lived experience to define our own psychology and our own way of describing our experience without trying to fit ourselves into a profoundly corrupt definition of relationship.
Right. And it's interesting, your point number one about how people look to the outside to see if their relationships are healthy and things like that. In lesbian relationships, that's incredibly hard to do because we don't have a lot of examples. So, for example, the number one divorcing couples are female couples
Yes.
because they don't get the support, they don't get validated in their relationships. And also, too, a lot of times there's no examples. You're sort of making it up as you go along
Yeah.
because we are living in an incredible patriarchal society in which when you're in a queer relationship and a lesbian relationship, a lot of the dynamics of roles are just, they don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. And it also can be really challenging.
And we, I think particularly for those of us that have been in heterosexual marriages, we carry all our own conditioning and our conditioning of ourselves into our next relationship. And one of the things that I've really picked up is that women are socialized to take responsibility for other people's feelings and for relationships. We were talking before we began recording about our children, for example. So the 60s popular psychology, this is when psychology and the books came out, like Dr. Spock for your children and the joy of sex and so on. It sounds really liberating, doesn't it? But in many ways it just gave the wife mother role an extra thing to do, because now they didn't just have to make the children's clothes and everybody's dinner and clean the house. They had to be a sort of pseudo psychologist and make sure that everybody was happy, having enough sex, that their husband was having enough sex, and so on. So I did absolutely take your point around the lack of role models, because one of the fantastic papers that I read was by a woman called Michaela Johnson, and she was talking about the lesbians in the media and how we were invisible up to a certain date and role models, and now she's saying even now, although there are far more lesbians in TV and film, that a lot of them are either the funny fat friend supporting character, or if they're the center of the story, they're very femme, they're very slim, they're very young.
We always laugh at that, my wife and I, because if you watch like any of the newer lesbian movies that are out, there's never a butch lesbian. It's always they're always two femmes, very good. And we both know in our culture that's more the rarity than the norm. I mean, yes, there are femmes that are together all the time, but generally that's like maybe 20%, versus all the other types of lesbian relationships that are out there.
Absolutely. So we have the ageism, and we have this
misogyny, because we want the women in the films. We want the women to not be too offensive, to look like that they could pass as straight if they wanted to. And so it's like that. There's the misogyny. Well, the misogyny in the movie industry, a whole nother.
Absolutely. So this lesbophobia, there was a subtle thing that was happening, is I was getting more clients coming to me from catalyst breakups and so on, and their ex having told them that they were borderline or narcissistic or or whatever, and believing these would be ex-girlfriends, you know, and just absorbing that as a new, as a, you know, they might have been older women, but they were baby lesbians,
Yeah, baby dads.
and just yeah, just taking it on board. And I was like, what is this? And then we have the, you know, in our groups, in the groups that you and I are in, and in your group, we sometimes explore, or people want to discuss, lesbian bed death is one of them, the lesbian U-Haul, lesbian drama. And so in my paper, I take apart those terms, which, you know, can equally apply to most heterosexual relationships.
It is.
You know?
The tropes that they throw out at us actually happen in straight relationships all the time.
Yes.
People
Yeah.
move in together too quickly, but it's not labeled as anything. You and I, both having lived in the straight world, were very, very aware of bed death with
Yes.
our former straight friends who, you know,
Yeah.
maybe sleep with their husband once a year, you know, if that, you know.
Yeah.
And so my question, Miriam, is why do they label us and pathologize?
Yeah. Well, I think it comes down, and we label ourselves. I think that, you know, this is something that we can challenge. We can't really do anything about what you know, the world out there does to us, but
Correct.
we can stop labeling ourselves. We can stop calling ourselves dramatic, hysterical. We can stop connecting the processes of our relationships with the fact that they're lesbian. You know, it's bed death, it's U-Haul. And I think, but also going back to this whole phenomenology, with being an older woman, Anne-Marie, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's U-Haul. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just sudden.
It just is.
Okay,
Yeah.
you know.
Mhm.
And okay, that's bad. You know, the sex has dropped off. It's not bad, it's not good, but I want to know how you in particular feel about it.
Mhm.
And you know, all of these things. And one a sort of a general trope in life is or saying in life is, you've got to love yourself first. And I always prickle when I hear this, because I know as a psychotherapist, and you know, you know this with working with people, is that if you've never been loved in your life,
It's
you
really
don't, how are you going to love yourself? Because you don't know what it is. And a lot of my clients, when they find somebody in their, it's just random luck, but they find somebody who's loving and kind, it's really healthy and really good for them, and they don't have to love themselves first. What I would say is that what we need to do is to know ourselves first, to understand ourselves first, to be compassionate, and that's where I'm moving to in my next bit of work, which I will talk about in a minute. But yeah, so I just wanted to say, this it's something about setting boundaries. We talk about a lot in our groups, but there isn't like a boundary rule book. And I'd really like listeners to remember that the boundaries are about you
Mhm.
and what's functional for you, and the expectation that ourselves or our partner are going to be able to fit into some sort of idealized model, which I think we create because we're not given
We're not
normal
giving a blueprint, right?
models. Yeah,
We're not
yeah,
giving
yeah. Isn't fair. You know, we're all a bit, you know, broken in places, and we have our hang-ups, and you know, and we need help. You know, I'm working on the idea of you know, codependence is used as a bad word, as a, you know, oh, that relationship's codependent, it's bad. Codependence is a form of co-regulating. You know, when we've all been through trauma, so to some extent we have some traumatic stuff within us. So, you know, sometimes when we pair up with somebody, we can look after each other in a conscious, contracted, agreed way. You don't like making phone calls, I'll do the phone calls.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Why not?
Right. And it's interesting because I was just reading an article from the Atlantic last night about codependence and about how we have, like, again, another word that arose with Melody Beattie, codependent no more, back in the 1980s. Um, and the person was talking about, and I didn't finish the article last night, so I can't speak with it with any knowledge, but like how codependence was used as another word to put on women in their
Yeah,
relationships of caregiving, that so that something is wrong with how they give love and how they
yeah,
care.
exactly. Yeah.
And
And then it all comes back to the shame that we've been talking about.
mhm. And so I'm really curious. I'm like want to go back and read your 50 Shades article. What else are you working on, Miriam?
Right. Well, so moving forward from this, honestly, I'm working on so many things. I'm having to, I have to keep saying, just
Yeah.
leave those notes and focus on this. So my thing at the moment is I've started a community group, and you're in that as well, and anybody listening is welcome to join, because I want to start rewriting the psychology for us.
Mhm.
And what I need is other people's words, not just mine. I want to listen. I want to listen to you and to other people to see if, what I'm coming up with is resonating, it is reflecting our experience. And I want us to, I'm not saying that we should be in relationships that are bad for us or toxic, but in terms of relationships working out, I think there's something particularly for mature women about compassion and kindness, about that we don't have to be 100% functional, and our relationships don't need to be perfect, and we can say the wrong thing or lose our boundaries and so on, and then we can come back and talk about it. And
Oh, yeah. Both of you and I are in relationships with long-term lesbians. We're both
yeah.
married to our wives.
Mhm.
And I think we met them probably around the same time, maybe a little
I
less. I
think,
don't
yeah,
know. Um,
yeah,
you said, "Oh, how's everything going?" And I'm like, "Well, I said, we're going through a really good period, right?"
yes, yeah, yeah,
That is normal in the cycle of relationships, to have these times where you're in love with each other and everything is wonderful, and the
yeah,
birds are singing and the butterflies are flying, and then there's times where things are a little rough.
yeah,
And the point is that happens in all relationships. And I think what you're trying to go with is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that because lesbian relationships, we don't have any models, that
mm,
if we come through a rough patch, it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, oh, this isn't working, and just
yeah,
leaving, instead
yeah,
of saying, okay, we're going through a rough patch right here.
mm,
How do we work together in this relationship? And what I think my wife and I have done is we both come into this relationship with a lot of trauma. We're
mm,
both,
mm.
you know,
Yeah, yes, yes,
we're both children of trauma. We
yeah,
both came to this relationship. We came from incredibly different experiences. Um,
mm, mm,
me, married woman with children, she, no kids, out in
mm,
the community for 40 years. We came like, it's like, we came from totally different cultures. And
mm.
as we have gotten to know each other, our trauma has gotten in the way, especially when we have fought. But
Yeah,
that's normal.
yes, yes,
And also, what we have learned through working with therapists, we have gone to couples therapy because sometimes we have struggled to communicate with each other.
yeah,
And
yeah,
we have gone to couples therapy over the years. and now we have somebody that like we would go to again if we needed to.
Mm.
And what we have learned is that our relationship is the important thing. So there's Tanda, there's me, and then there's the relationship we formed together. And if you can't see me, I'm holding my hands together. And there's that relationship together. And so now our thinking has gone to like, okay, we want to preserve this. This is really good what we have.
Yeah.
How do we do that when we're really pissed off at the other person?
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I think that there are some problems that come up for lesbians, like overthinking, over talking, over analyzing, and and we can do damage by applying labels to our partners, and using those words, those terms that I'm challenging. But I think that I'll just tell you a funny story before we finish. But my partner and I, she and I were in couples therapy, and it was pretty awful actually, although the therapist was a lesbian. And it was just, we'd come out and we'd feel so bad. And this was before we got married, and we were also going to dance classes to learn our wedding dance. And it's on my wife's day off that we did both these things. And we'd turn up to dance class and we'd be in foul moods, and then we
gotta dance with you now.
Focus on this dance, and we'd come out feeling good. In the end, Anne-Marie, we ditched the therapy and we kept on with the dance, and our relationship healed, because there's something when you're dancing and you look at the woman in front of you and you think, oh, I love you. And then you're feeling their body in your arms, and you're thinking, oh, we have chemistry.
Right.
And you're moving around, you're thinking, I know you so well. I know your movements. And it's sometimes communicating without words is, and to stop analyzing and labeling and trying to look for the answers, and to just think, oh, I say about my wife, you are the untidiest, I think in my head, you're the untidiest person in the world. But I've learned that your wife is not your best friend, in the sense of, when we're in our heterosexual marriages, we get through those by having our girlfriends, and we go, oh, you'll never guess what he did last night, or this is where he leaves his dirty laundry, or whatever. And we say negative things about our husbands to our girlfriends. And I think that because a lot of the women that we know have actually fallen in love perhaps with a friend, they forget, and I've forgotten. I used to talk to my wife all the time about my grief around my marriage, and my grief around the loss of the house, and my grief. So inappropriate.
I talk about that all the time. I say, like, okay, so a lot of times, like, and I've written about this, like Tana wrote a piece about this, because we're so used to being with women, and women are our best friends, but this is your lover.
Yeah.
The caveats I say to people is, because we're so steeped in heteronormativity, like, would you tell this to a boyfriend that you're dating? And so like, we talk about like appropriate boundaries around, like, what do you tell your new lover?
Yeah.
Do you need to share all of the grief? And like, Tanda got all my grief too.
Yeah.
And it took her, she wrote it, I love this piece she wrote, because it took her about a year to realize that this had nothing to do with her or our relationship.
And she didn't have to fix it.
And no, she didn't have to fix it, and she just had to listen to it. But I also like learned that she wasn't my best. She is my best friend, but like at that time, she wasn't the person that I should have shared every freaking detail with, because that was a lot for her to carry. And I was so like, and also too, during that time of that, what we call in our community, like our second adolescence, but I argue it's the first adolescence, because we never had a first one the first time around. We are a little bit self-absorbed.
Yes.
And Right, and it's almost like we're absorbed for about like self-absorbed for like 6 months or a year, and
Yeah.
that's okay. It's okay to be self-absorbed because a lot of times we've spent our whole entire life giving, 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 giving,
Of
giving.
course, yeah,
Yeah,
but of course we found the groups eventually because
yes,
it was
amen.
those groups that we could talk to, and and my wife was really supportive, but it was too much
Yes,
for her to carry, and I think you and I were also speaking about our hetero marriages
right.
before, and
Mhm.
it's like the joy of having a partner who's actually not zoning out and ignoring you.
This
It's
is,
very tempting to tell them your heart, your soul, every thought in your head.
absolutely, and like, and somebody who has been, who was in a hetero marriage for a long time, like to me, I always talk to like tell Tanda, like when we get ready for a party, when we're having a party, the two of us just get ready. She
Mm,
doesn't ask me what to do.
mm,
She
mm,
just pitches in. I know it's so minor in the grand scheme of things, but it brings me such joy because
it's,
in
mm,
my hetero marriage, I was often like responsible for everything and I had to do everything by myself
me
or
too.
course, what's the word? I'm not coerce people, coerce my ex-husband to help me. And
Yeah,
it was like,
yeah.
and it added more stress because he didn't want to do it. And, that's my responsibility. And so, I have such like the little joys of for me, being in a queer relationship is absolutely
Oh,
wonderful.
yeah, me too. And I resonate with so much of what you say, and it's so nice to be validated and exist with our partners. But the therapist that I said wasn't that good did say one thing, and I was so offended, and she was absolutely right. She said, Miriam, your wife doesn't need to know every thought in your head. And inside a little part of me went, really?
Well, that's so
So
Miriam, go ahead.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just laughing at I think that's what we do a lot is my wife and I, we laugh about these things because it's all discoveries, and we don't have a guide or a role model to tell us,
Mm.
and yeah, I would say that laughter is it's funny, it's funny that we don't realize these things, and
True. And then, it's like, as you said, the scales fall from your eyes and you
yeah,
realize that there's other ways to live than the ways we have, I'm going to use the word, groomed to live our entire lives. And then
yeah,
once you realize that, wait a minute, I can live a different way than the one I've been told I'm supposed to live,
mm,
um, and then find joy in that. It's
yeah,
in this, honestly, Miriam and I are talking about people coming out later in life, but this is for anybody.
yeah,
Honestly, anybody who, and middle age is 35 to like 60. So
yeah,
it doesn't really matter, like how, like if you're
mm,
58 right now and saying, oh my God, I can't do this. Yes, you can. You
yeah,
can find joy and you can happiness. And even after, middle age, 65, 70, people can
of
do that,
course.
you know?
And yeah, and I suppose my message today would be, when relationships go wrong, it's part of your conditioning to think it's your fault, and it's part of grief to go over what did I do wrong, what could I have done differently. But it is actually inherently sexist. If you're talking about a breakup from a man, he's probably not going over it in the way that you are. And
Absolutely.
you
So,
know,
Miriam, how do people find you? Like, if somebody would like to come and work with you, and join one of your groups, your later in life support groups, how do people work with you?
well, I've got a website, so if you just type in Miriam Grace, psychotherapist, it should come up. And one of my pages on my website is about coming out and living an authentic life, and it does have links to our interviews, Anne Marie, and publications. And I've got two things that might be of interest coming up. I've got a one-day workshop on lesbian heartbreak on April the 12th. And then I'm going to do a therapy group, which will be just for 2 months in May and June on Wednesday evenings UK time. So it'll be, that would be something that people could join from America in the afternoons on a Wednesday. And it'll be 8 sessions, and it's to really explore some more about our internalized assumptions and judgments and harshness to ourselves. And you know, if I had any aim or objective again for that group, it would be to come out trusting the process, trusting yourself. If you've got a partner, trusting your partner, that these things can be worked through, and that you know that you don't have to wear a hair shirt and feel badly about yourself. There's nothing to be ashamed of. We're all learning, and we've all got our stuff, and we can be kind about that.
Mhm. Well, I'm going to let that be the last word today, Miriam Grace. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was nice to have you. Miriam is going to rejoin me in a couple of months, and we're going to talk about estrangement. It's something that both Miriam and I have faced, and we're going to talk about estrangement with our children. So she'll be back in a couple months, and we'll do that again. But all the links from Miriam's former appearance on this podcast, as well as in the blog, will be in the show notes. So please go take a look at it. And if you are somebody who is struggling with a breakup, a lesbian breakup, that one-day workshop sounds wonderful. So please go and sign up. Thank you, Miriam.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA+ stories with Anne-Marie Zanzal. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzal.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzal.com.